Clara, the maid, smirked, watching the little girl tremble. "You'll never tell your father." The child, Lily, clutched her worn teddy bear. Just then, Robert opened the door. What he saw froze his heart forever. Robert Maxwell stepped out of the private jet. The crisp autumn air of his hometown, a stark contrast to the humid climate he had left behind. The weariness of a transatlantic flight settled deep in his bones, a familiar companion after years of relentless travel for his global tech empire. Yet, beneath the professional exhaustion, a quiet hum of anticipation vibrated through him as he pictured Lily, his bright-eyed daughter, her hair like spun gold, and baby Leo, whose gurgles were the sweetest music. They were the anchors in his otherwise adrift existence, the precious remnants of a love that had departed too soon, leaving a void that even his immense wealth could never fill. His wife's loss during Leo's arrival had reshaped his entire world, leaving him a widower grappling with both immense grief and the daunting responsibility of nurturing two young souls. The drive home was a blur of familiar streets and changing leaves, each turn bringing him closer to the sanctuary he had built for his children. A grand estate nestled among ancient oaks. He had entrusted their care to Clara, the housekeeper, a woman whose resume boasted impeccable references and whose demeanor was always one of quiet efficiency and seemingly unwavering dedication. Her prim uniform was always spotless, her smile perpetually serene, suggesting a calm and capable presence that had initially brought him a measure of peace amidst his own sorrow and demanding schedule. He had convinced himself that his frequent absences, born of necessity to maintain the legacy he hoped to pass to his children, were mitigated by Clara's steady hand, a comforting thought that now, in the quiet hum of the luxury car, felt increasingly fragile and unsettling. As the car pulled up the long, winding driveway, the mansion stood bathed in the soft glow of twilight, an imposing yet beautiful structure that usually welcomed him with a sense of belonging. Tonight, however, an unsettling stillness hung in the air, a silent sentinel guarding an unspoken secret. He dismissed it as jet lag playing tricks on his senses, but a tiny, insistent knot of unease began to tighten in his chest. The front door, usually left ajar for his return, was firmly shut, and the usually cheerful sounds of children playing were conspicuously absent. He let himself in, the click of the lock echoing unnaturally loud in the cavernous foyer, and his eyes swept over the pristine, silent space, a growing sense of dread replacing his earlier anticipation. He moved through the grand living room, his footsteps muffled by the thick Persian rugs, heading instinctively towards the children's wing. The silence was absolute, a heavy blanket that smothered any residual warmth from the day. Then, faint and almost imperceptible, a muffled sob reached him from behind the closed door of Lily's bedroom. It was a sound that pierced through his exhaustion, igniting an immediate primal fear within him. He paused, his breath catching in his throat, straining to hear over the sudden pounding of his own heart. A sharp, hushed voice followed, unmistakably Clara's, laced with an edge he had never heard before, a chilling undertone of thinly veiled menace that sent shivers down his spine. He pressed his ear to the polished wood, his mind racing, trying to make sense of the hushed whispers and the agonizing sniffles. He heard Clara's voice again, clearer this time, speaking with a cold authority that contrasted sharply with her usual gentle tone. "You'll never tell your father, do you understand? Not a word, or there will be consequences." A small, trembling voice, Lily's voice, responded, barely a whisper. "Please, Clara, don't hurt Leo." The words were a knife twisting in Robert's gut, a sudden, brutal assault on his carefully constructed peace. His heart plummeted, a cold dread washing over him, instantly dispelling any lingering fatigue. The image of the serene housekeeper shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces, revealing something far more sinister beneath. Without a second thought, His hand gripped the ornate doorknob, turning it with a force born of pure, unadulterated terror and protective instinct. The door swung inward with a soft creak, revealing a scene that ripped through his very soul. Clara stood over Lily, her back to the door, a menacing shadow looming over the small, huddled figure of his daughter. Lily sat on the floor, her face streaked with tears, her tiny hands clutching a worn teddy bear as if it were her only shield against a looming storm. Her eyes, wide and terrified, darted towards the door, and a raw, desperate plea escaped her lips. "Daddy, please, protect us." The words hung in the air, a devastating accusation, a shattering cry for help that echoed the deepest fears of a father who had been too far away for too long. Robert stood frozen, his eyes widening in disbelief, the carefully maintained facade of his perfect life crumbling around him. The sight before him, a tableau of innocence under siege, was a nightmare made real, and in that instant, his world irrevocably shifted. Robert's heart, a fortress of stoic grief built over years, fractured at the sight of Lily's tear-streaked face and her desperate plea. The world outside the room, a world of high-stakes deals and global ventures, vanished, replaced by the suffocating reality of his child's terror. He stepped fully into the room, his towering frame casting a long shadow, his voice, usually calm and measured, a guttural growl that barely escaped his throat. Clara spun around, her face a mask of momentary shock, which quickly contorted into a practiced expression of concern, a chillingly swift transformation that did not escape Robert's now hyper-alert gaze. She began to speak, her voice falsely sweet, a saccharine lie attempting to explain away the undeniable fear etched on Lily's face. Something about a nightmare, a child's overactive imagination, anything to deflect from the palpable tension that crackled in the air. But Robert saw past the facade, the subtle shift in her eyes, the way her hands clenched ever so slightly at her sides, betraying the icy calm she desperately tried to project. Robert had always been a man of immense success, his name synonymous with innovation and unparalleled wealth in the tech world. His empire, built from the ground up with relentless drive and brilliant foresight, afforded him a life of unimaginable luxury. Yet, this glittering exterior hid a profound emptiness, a chasm carved into his soul by the untimely departure of his beloved wife during Leo's arrival. Her light, her laughter, her boundless love had been the true foundation of his existence, and with her gone, a part of him had withered, leaving behind a workaholic driven by a desperate need to provide for his children, even if it meant sacrificing his presence. He had immersed himself in work, believing that financial security was the ultimate expression of his love, a tragic miscalculation born of grief and an inability to confront the raw pain of his loss. He relied on Clara, seeing her as the capable, trustworthy caretaker who could fill the void of his absence, allowing him to chase the phantom of success that he hoped would somehow honor his wife's memory. Lily, a vibrant girl of 6, possessed her mother's sparkling eyes and an innate curiosity that had always charmed him. She was imaginative and sensitive, her world a kaleidoscope of stories and dreams. Her younger brother, Leo, a chubby, gurgling infant, was a constant reminder of the bittersweet circumstances of his birth, a tiny beacon of new life amidst the lingering shadows of sorrow. Robert adored them fiercely, a love that had, until this moment, been expressed primarily through lavish gifts and the assurance of a comfortable life, rather than the everyday intimacy they craved. Clara had appeared to nurture this bond, often sharing anecdotes of their day, painting a picture of domestic bliss that now felt like a cruel deception. Her initial interviews had been flawless, her references impeccable, depicting a woman of unwavering integrity and a deep affection for children. Robert, blinded by his own grief and the demanding nature of his work, had seen only what he wanted to see, a solution to his impossible predicament. Clara, with her prim uniform and perpetually serene smile, was a picture of unwavering professionalism, a woman who seemed to embody the very essence of dedication. She had been with the Maxwell family for nearly 2 years, a constant presence in the children's lives, managing the sprawling estate with an efficiency that bordered on perfection. Yet, beneath that polished veneer, a chilling current of resentment and avarice flowed, a dark undercurrent born from a lifetime of perceived slights and unfulfilled desires. She had watched Robert's detached grief, his endless work trips, and the innocent vulnerability of his children, and a twisted plan had begun to form in her mind. She saw not a grieving father and his precious offspring, but an opportunity, a vast fortune ripe for the taking, and 2 helpless obstacles to her ultimate goal. Her motivations were a complex tapestry of bitterness and greed, a desire to elevate herself from her humble beginnings by any means necessary, even if it meant preying on the innocent. Robert knelt before Lily, his hands gently cupping her face, wiping away the tears that still streamed down her cheeks. He looked into her terrified eyes, eyes that held a depth of fear no child should ever know, and the weight of his frequent absences, his emotional distance, crashed down upon him with the force of a tidal wave. Guilt, raw and suffocating, threatened to consume him. He had been so preoccupied with the external world, with building an empire, that he had failed to truly see the internal world of his own home, the quiet struggles of his children, the sinister machinations unfolding right under his nose. The faint red mark on Lily's arm, partially hidden by her sleeve, caught his eye, a small but undeniable bruise that spoke volumes. Clara, seeing his gaze, quickly interjected, her voice still falsely sweet, attributing it to a playful tumble, a child's clumsiness. But the explanation rang hollow, a discordant note in the symphony of his dawning horror. A cold, hard resolve began to solidify within Robert, pushing aside the grief and guilt, replacing it with a fierce, protective fire. He would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Robert, his heart still a tumultuous sea of fear and fury, forced himself to take a deep, steadying breath, his towering frame momentarily shrinking as he knelt fully to meet Lily's gaze. He tried to project a calm he did not feel, his voice a low rumble as he gently asked Clara to leave them for a moment, needing to speak with Lily alone. Clara, ever the chameleon, offered a saccharine smile, her eyes briefly glinting with something unreadable before she nodded, murmuring a soft apology for the supposed misunderstanding, and gracefully exited the room, leaving behind a faint, cloying scent of lavender and a lingering chill. The silence that fell in her wake was heavy, broken only by Lily's ragged breathing and the distant, muffled cries of baby Leo from the nursery, a sound that now resonated with an alarming urgency in Robert's ears. He pulled Lily into a tender embrace, feeling her small body tremble against his, and the raw, unvarnished truth of her fear settled deeper into his soul, solidifying his resolve to uncover the dark secrets lurking within his own home. Over the next few days, Robert's once familiar mansion transformed into a landscape of suspicion and quiet dread. He canceled all his upcoming business trips, citing an urgent family matter, a decision that surprised his board, but one he knew was profoundly necessary. He moved through the grand halls and sunlit rooms with a newfound vigilance, his senses heightened. Every creak, every shadow, every hushed whisper, now imbued with potential meaning. Clara, for her part, resumed her role with an unsettling perfection, her movements precise, her smile unwavering, her attentiveness to Robert almost suffocating. She would anticipate his needs, bring him his coffee exactly as he liked it, and offer meticulously detailed reports on the children's activities, painting a picture of idyllic domesticity that stood in stark contrast to the terror he had witnessed in Lily's eyes. Yet, Beneath this veneer of flawless service, Robert began to notice the subtle, chilling shifts in her demeanor when she thought herself unobserved. He saw the fleeting, harsh glance she cast at Lily when the child accidentally spilled juice, a look of pure, unadulterated contempt that vanished the instant Robert turned his head. He heard the sudden cessation of Leo's cries whenever Clara entered the nursery, an unnatural quiet that spoke volumes of suppressed fear, not comfort. The children, too, bore the subtle, heartbreaking marks of their ordeal. Lily, usually so effervescent and talkative, had retreated into herself, her laughter replaced by a quiet solemnity. She clung to Robert with an almost desperate intensity, her small hand always seeking his, her eyes darting nervously towards Clara whenever the housekeeper entered a room. She spoke in whispers, her stories of mythical creatures and brave knights replaced by vague mentions of bad dreams and loud noises when Clara was away, words that felt like veiled cries for help she was too afraid to voice explicitly. Leo, barely a year old, seemed unusually fussy, his gurgles often dissolving into whimpers, and Robert noticed faint, unexplained red marks on his delicate skin during bath time, small bruises that Clara would dismiss with a practiced shrug, attributing them to the clumsy tumbles of an active baby. The nursery door, Robert also observed, was often locked from the outside when Clara was in charge, a detail he had previously overlooked, believing it to be a safety measure, but now understood as a means of confinement and control, isolating his precious children from the world and from any potential solace. Driven by a crushing wave of guilt for his past blindness and a ferocious paternal instinct, Robert began his own quiet investigation. He started by examining the house with a detective's eye, searching for anything amiss, any anomaly in the pristine order Clara meticulously maintained. He checked the children's toys, their books, even their clothes, hoping for a hidden message, a scrap of evidence. One evening, as he sat in his study, the weight of his wife's absence pressing heavily upon him, his gaze fell upon a small, ornate wooden box on his desk, a keepsake she had given him years ago, filled with their most cherished memories. He hadn't dared open it since her passing, the pain too raw, too overwhelming. But now, a sudden, inexplicable urge compelled him. He lifted the lid, revealing a cascade of faded photographs, dried flowers, and tucked beneath them all, a single, elegantly penned letter, sealed with her favorite wax stamp. His hands trembled as he opened it, the familiar scent of her perfume, a faint whisper from the past, filling the air. It was a letter she had written shortly before Leo's arrival, a heartfelt reflection on their life, her hopes for their children, and a tender plea for him to always be present, to truly see them, even if she could not. But then, near the end, a paragraph caught his breath, chilling him to the bone. She wrote of a subtle unease she had felt recently, a fleeting sense of discomfort regarding the new housekeeper, Clara. There's a coldness behind her eyes, Robert, she had penned, her elegant script now seeming to carry a prophetic weight. A calculating air that makes me worry for our little ones, should anything ever happen to me. Promise me, my love, that you will always protect them, truly see them, and never let anyone, no matter how outwardly kind, stand between you and their happiness. The words were a ghost's warning, a desperate message from beyond, confirming his darkest fears and igniting a firestorm of regret within him. His wife, even in her final days, had possessed a clarity he had tragically lacked, a keen intuition that had seen through Clara's carefully crafted facade. The letter was not just a clue, it was a sacred trust, a call to action from the woman he had loved more than life itself, and Robert knew, with an unwavering certainty, that he would honor it, bringing the truth to light and justice to his children. The words from his beloved wife, a tender whisper from beyond the veil, solidified Robert's resolve into an unyielding force. The grief that had once paralyzed him now fueled a burning need for justice, a desperate urgency to right the wrongs committed against his innocent children. He carefully folded the letter, placing it back in the wooden box, a sacred testament to a love that transcended even the finality of departure. The quiet hum of the house, once merely background noise, now seemed to throb with unspoken secrets, each shadow a potential hiding place for Clara's insidious cruelty. He knew he could not confront her directly without concrete evidence, for her cunning was as sharp as her facade was polished. His approach had to be methodical, silent, a meticulous unraveling of the web she had spun, and in the depths of his despair, a nascent hope began to flicker, a promise to his wife and to himself that he would finally be the protector his family deserved. From that moment, Robert's life became a carefully orchestrated performance, a delicate dance of feigned normalcy and covert investigation. He observed Clara with an intensity that would have unnerved anyone less practiced in deception. He watched her every movement, the way her eyes lingered on expensive artwork, the subtle tension in her jaw when she thought herself unobserved, the almost imperceptible sneer that would briefly mar her serene expression when Lily stumbled or Leo cried too loudly. He started spending more time at home, canceling all but the most critical virtual meetings, creating an illusion of a father finally settling into domestic life. This shift, however, was a double-edged sword. While it allowed him closer proximity to his children, it also gave Clara more opportunities to display her practiced subservience, making it harder to catch her in unguarded moments. Yet, the signs were there, if one knew how to look, like the way Lily would instinctively shrink back when Clara reached out, or the almost imperceptible flinch in Leo's tiny body whenever the housekeeper's shadow fell over his crib. One afternoon, a sharp, piercing cry erupted from the nursery, followed by a sudden, unnatural silence. Robert, who had been in his study, felt his blood run cold. He rushed towards the sound, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, only to find the nursery door firmly locked from the outside. A wave of ice-cold dread washed over him, confirming his earlier suspicions about the locked doors. He rattled the handle, his voice tight with barely suppressed fury, calling Clara's name. Moments later, her footsteps approached, light and unhurried, and she appeared, a picture of calm efficiency, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. She explained, with an infuriatingly placid tone, that Leo had been particularly fussy, and she had momentarily stepped out to fetch a soothing toy, locking the door for the baby's safety. The explanation was plausible enough to anyone else, but Robert saw the triumph in her eyes, the subtle mockery that dared him to question her. He forced himself to nod, his hands clenching into fists behind his back, pretending to accept her explanation. But the incident only solidified his resolve to expose her. He began to install tiny, imperceptible cameras throughout the children's wing, disguised within smoke detectors and decorative ornaments, a clandestine network of eyes and ears that would finally reveal the truth. It felt like a betrayal of his own home, a violation of the sanctity he had always cherished. But the desperate plea in Lily's eyes, the warning from his wife, outweighed any moral qualms. He meticulously reviewed the footage each night after Clara had retired, watching hours of mundane domesticity, waiting, searching for the crack in her perfect facade. The initial recordings showed little beyond her meticulous care of the house and the children, a frustrating testament to her cunning. Yet, he persisted, driven by an unwavering belief in his wife's intuition and his children's unspoken fear. He started spending more time with Lily, reading her stories, building elaborate block towers, and listening intently to her innocent chatter, hoping that in their shared moments of genuine connection, she might feel safe enough to reveal more. During these quiet times, Lily slowly began to unfurl, her vibrant spirit tentatively re-emerging. She would lean into his touch, her small hand finding comfort in his, and her eyes, though still holding a flicker of apprehension, would meet his with a renewed trust. One evening, as Robert tucked her into bed, she whispered, her voice barely audible, "Clara says I'm clumsy, Daddy. She says I make too much noise." Robert's heart ached at the words, recognizing the insidious psychological abuse hidden beneath the seemingly innocuous statement. He hugged her tighter, promising her that she was perfect, that her laughter and play were beautiful, and that he would always protect her from anyone who made her feel otherwise. He saw the faint, almost healed bruise on her wrist, a reminder of the previous encounter, and a fresh wave of protective fury surged through him. He knew he was getting closer, that the truth was slowly but surely coming into focus, piece by agonizing piece, and he would not rest until Clara's dark machinations were brought into the harsh glare of the light. The hidden cameras, silent sentinels throughout the children's wing, became Robert's nightly ritual, a haunting cinema of his own home's darkest hours. He spent countless evenings hunched over his laptop, the blue light illuminating his determined face, meticulously scrubbing through hours of footage. Most of it was innocuous, Clara performing her duties with an almost unsettling precision, a testament to her calculated facade. Yet, as the days bled into weeks, the cracks in her composure began to appear, subtle at first, then increasingly stark. One night, he watched as Clara, believing herself utterly alone, entered Lily's room after the child was asleep. Her serene smile vanished, replaced by a sneer that twisted her features into something ugly and cold. She didn't touch Lily, but her words, captured by the sensitive microphone hidden in a decorative bird, were a chilling torrent of venom, a whispered tirade about ungrateful children and wasted opportunities, a stark contrast to the saccharine sweetness she displayed during the day. Robert felt a cold wave of nausea wash over him, his wife's warning echoing in his ears with renewed ferocity. This was not just neglect. This was calculated psychological torment, chipping away at the fragile innocence of his daughter. The footage from Leo's nursery was even more disturbing. While Clara never resorted to overt violence, the recordings revealed a pattern of cruel indifference. She would leave Leo crying inconsolably in his crib for extended periods, sometimes for over an hour, despite being just outside the door, engrossed in a magazine or chatting on her phone. He saw her rough handling of the baby during diaper changes, not outright abuse, but a lack of tenderness, a perfunctory, almost resentful touch that made Robert's stomach churn. The unexplained red marks on Leo's delicate skin now made horrifying sense, not from clumsy tumbles, but from hurried, careless movements. He witnessed her deliberately withholding a favorite toy when Leo reached for it, a petty act of control that spoke volumes about the deep-seated malice simmering beneath her polished exterior. The locked nursery door, he realized, wasn't just for safety, it was to ensure her cruel practices remained unseen, unheard, a private prison for his infant son. As Robert delved deeper, the cameras began to reveal more than just Clara's treatment of the children. One evening, the camera in his study, disguised as a small clock, captured Clara entering the room long after everyone else was asleep. She moved with a stealthy confidence, her eyes scanning the bookshelves, the desk, her fingers lingering on various objects. Then, with a casualness that bespoke familiarity, she opened a locked drawer in his antique writing desk, a drawer he rarely used and believed secure. His heart pounded as he watched her retrieve a small, leather-bound ledger, his personal financial records, and quickly photograph several pages with her phone before replacing it, locking the drawer and slipping away as silently as she had arrived. A chilling realization dawned upon him. Clara was not just a cruel caregiver. She was a calculating predator, systematically gathering information, perhaps even planning to exploit his wealth, leveraging his grief-induced absence. The thought that she might be attempting to manipulate his inheritance, or worse, steal from him, ignited a fresh surge of protective fury, a fire that burned away the last vestiges of his passive grief. The subtle confrontations began to escalate, though still veiled in politeness. Robert, armed with his growing collection of evidence, started asking Clara pointed questions, couched in casual conversation, about discrepancies in household expenses or odd marks on the children. Clara, ever adept at deception, would weave elaborate explanations, her eyes never betraying a flicker of unease, her voice always calm and reassuring. Yet, Robert noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way her smile became just a fraction too wide, a millimeter too forced. He also began to observe her taking late-night calls, hushed conversations held in the secluded corners of the house, her voice dropping to an almost inaudible whisper, her demeanor shifting to one of furtive urgency. He tried to get closer to hear, but she was always too quick, disappearing before he could discern any words. His reconnection with Lily deepened profoundly during this period. He spent every waking moment he could with her and Leo, showering them with the attention and unconditional love they had been starved of. He would read Lily stories, letting her snuggle close, her small body finally relaxing against his. He sang lullabies to Leo, his deep voice a soothing balm, holding the baby close until the tiny whimpers subsided into peaceful slumber. Lily, feeling the warmth of her father's unwavering presence, began to open up further. One afternoon, while they were drawing together, she looked up at him, her eyes wide with a fragile trust. "Clara said you wouldn't love me if I wasn't quiet," she whispered, her small fingers tracing a line on her paper. Robert's heart shattered, and then solidified with fierce determination. He pulled her into a tight embrace, burying his face in her soft hair, promising her, again and again, that his love was boundless, that her voice, her laughter, her very being was a gift, and that no one would ever make her feel otherwise again. He knew then, with absolute certainty, that he had enough. The evidence, both tangible and emotional, was overwhelming. It was time to act, to bring the darkness into the light, and reclaim his children's peace. Robert's heart, a vessel once heavy with sorrow, now beat with a fierce, unwavering purpose. The truth, meticulously pieced together from whispered fears, lingering bruises, and the stark, irrefutable clarity of the hidden cameras, had painted a portrait of Clara far removed from the serene, dedicated housekeeper he had blindly trusted. The image of her photographing his private financial ledger, a brazen act of calculated theft, had been the final bitter drop in a chalice overflowing with betrayal. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that he could no longer allow her insidious presence to taint the sanctity of his home or the fragile innocence of his children. His wife's spectral warning, woven into the fabric of her last letter, resonated deeply within him, a sacred vow to protect their precious legacy, and he would honor it with every fiber of his being. He spent the next few days in a whirlwind of discreet action, his movements precise and purposeful. He contacted a trusted legal team, renowned for their expertise in family law and their unwavering commitment to justice, presenting them with the meticulously organized evidence he had gathered. The footage, compressed into easily viewable files, spoke volumes, showcasing Clara's moments of chilling indifference, her psychological manipulation of Lily, and the disturbing neglect of baby Leo. The financial records, cross-referenced with his own accounts, revealed subtle but consistent discrepancies, small sums siphoned away over time, disguised as legitimate household expenses, a testament to her calculated avarice. He also prepared a detailed timeline of events, noting every instance of suspicious behavior, every unexplained mark, every whispered fear from Lily. The legal team, initially skeptical of a client's self-gathered evidence, quickly recognized the irrefutable weight of his findings, their expressions shifting from professional detachment to grim determination. Meanwhile, Clara, seemingly oblivious to the tightening net around her, continued her charade with an unnerving confidence. Her smiles remained serene, her uniform pristine, her movements efficient. Yet Robert, now acutely attuned to her subtle tells, noticed a heightened arrogance in her demeanor, a barely perceptible swagger in her step, as if she believed herself utterly untouchable, her dominion over his children and his household absolute. She would occasionally cast a triumphant glance at him when she thought he wasn't looking, a flicker of smug satisfaction in her eyes, as if relishing her perceived victory over his grief and his supposed naivety. This brazen display only hardened Robert's resolve, transforming his quiet grief into a steely resolve, a commitment to expose the insidious darkness she harbored. He continued to play his part, maintaining a facade of normalcy, engaging her in polite conversation about household matters, all the while knowing that her carefully constructed world was poised on the precipice of collapse. He also made sure to spend even more time with Lily and Leo, consciously rebuilding the emotional bridges that Clara had so cruelly sought to dismantle. He would sit with Lily for hours, letting her draw and tell him stories, her small hand nestled securely in his, gently coaxing her laughter back into the quiet corners of the house. He held Leo close, feeling the soft weight of his son against his chest, murmuring words of love and reassurance, watching as the baby's initial fussiness slowly gave way to contented coos and gurgles. The children, sensing his unwavering presence and unconditional love, began to blossom once more, their spirits tentatively unfurling like fragile flowers after a long, harsh winter. Lily's eyes, once clouded with apprehension, now sparkled with a renewed light, and Leo's tiny hands would reach out for him with an eager trust that brought a profound healing to Robert's own wounded soul. This reconnection was not just a means to an end. It was the true heart of his fight, the very essence of the justice he sought. The day came when Robert knew he could no longer delay. He had arranged for the authorities to arrive discreetly, their presence an unseen force, waiting in the wings. He called Clara into his study, the room where his wife's prophetic letter had first illuminated the chilling truth. The air in the room was thick with unspoken tension, the grand mahogany desk a silent witness to the impending confrontation. Clara entered, her usual placid expression firmly in place, her eyes betraying nothing. Robert, his voice calm but imbued with an undeniable authority, began to speak, not with accusations, but with carefully chosen questions, each one a subtle thread pulling at the fabric of her deception. He spoke of the discrepancies in the household accounts, the missing small sums, the illogical expenses. Clara, initially maintaining her composure, offered practiced excuses, her voice smooth and unwavering, attempting to deflect and deny, her lips curving into a familiar, unconvincing smile. Then Robert produced a printout of the financial ledger, open to the pages she had photographed, his eyes locking onto hers with an unwavering intensity. He observed the imperceptible flicker in her gaze, the almost instantaneous stiffening of her posture, a tiny crack in her otherwise impenetrable facade. He continued, his voice steady. "I also noticed the nursery door has been locked from the outside on several occasions, Clara. And Lily mentioned something about being told she was clumsy, that her laughter was too loud." The carefully constructed calm around Clara began to fray at the edges, a subtle tremor running through her hands, her smile twisting into something less serene, more brittle. Her eyes, which had always held a placid emptiness, now sparked with a nascent fury, a raw, untamed resentment bubbling to the surface. The mask was beginning to slip, revealing the true face of the predator beneath, And Robert knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that the moment of truth, the long-awaited unveiling, was finally at hand. He braced himself, ready to face the storm he had so painstakingly prepared to unleash, knowing that justice, though slow, was now inevitable. Clara's carefully constructed composure finally shattered. Her eyes, now blazing with a raw, ugly hatred, narrowed into slits, and a guttural sound, more animalistic than human, escaped her throat. She shrieked, her voice echoing off the study walls, a torrent of bitter accusations and resentments pouring forth. She railed against Robert's immense wealth, his perceived indifference, the unfairness of her own life compared to his, revealing a deep-seated envy that had festered into a toxic obsession. She confessed, without a hint of remorse, to the petty cruelties inflicted upon Lily, the calculated neglect of Leo, justifying each act as a deserved consequence for what she deemed their pampered existence. Her words were a chilling testament to the depth of her malice, a horrifying confirmation of Robert's darkest fears, and in that moment, the last vestiges of his doubt evaporated, replaced by a cold, righteous fury. He stood firm, allowing her to expose the full extent of her depravity, knowing that every word she uttered was another nail in the coffin of her freedom. As Clara's tirade reached its crescendo, the study door opened discreetly, and two officers, who had been waiting patiently in the foyer, entered the room, their presence a silent, authoritative force. Clara's eyes widened in stunned disbelief, her voice catching in her throat as she realized the trap she had walked into. The raw fury on her face morphed into a mask of abject terror, her carefully cultivated composure collapsing entirely. Robert, his gaze unwavering, simply nodded to the officers, a silent command for them to proceed. They calmly, but firmly, informed Clara of her arrest, their voices cutting through the charged atmosphere with professional precision. She struggled briefly, a pathetic display of defiance, but their grip was firm, their resolve unyielding. As they escorted her out, past the very children she had tormented, Clara cast one last look of venomous hatred back at Robert, a silent promise of lingering malevolence. But he met her gaze with an unshakable resolve, a testament to the strength he had found in protecting his family. The house, once filled with her insidious presence, now breathed a collective sigh of relief. The oppressive shadow finally lifted. 2 years later, the Maxwell Mansion, once a place shadowed by grief and betrayal, vibrated with a renewed warmth and light. The grand rooms, once echoing with unspoken sorrow, now resonated with the joyful sounds of children's laughter and the gentle hum of a family truly alive. Robert, his face etched with lines of past struggle, but now softened by profound peace, watched Lily and Leo play in the sprawling garden, their spirits vibrant and free. Lily, now a bright-eyed 8-year-old, tended to a small patch of sunflowers, her hands expertly digging in the soil, her earlier timidity replaced by a confident, joyful curiosity. Leo, a robust and cheerful toddler, chased butterflies with boundless energy, his infectious giggles filling the air. Robert found new solace in shared activities, baking cookies with Lily, building block castles, and cherishing every moment. Family meals, once silent and somber affairs, were now lively gatherings, filled with stories and the comforting clatter of silverware. He had found a new purpose, a deeper connection to life, realizing that true wealth lay not in his fortune, but in the boundless love he shared with his children. The journey, fraught with darkness, had culminated in a profound triumph of the human spirit, teaching Robert that even in the deepest shadows, light can be found through courage, truth, and the unwavering power of love. What lengths would you go to protect the innocence of a child? How would you find the strength to rebuild shattered trust? Share your thoughts and stories below, and remember, in every act of kindness, every moment of unwavering love, we build a world where justice prevails and every heart finds its way home.